Welcome to Module 1 of our course on Comparative Economic Systems. In this first part of our journey, we are going to explore the theoretical roots and historical realities of different economic systems, with a primary focus on socialism and its various adaptations. We will start with the early debates, the great ideological and practical arguments that shaped the 20th century's political economy. Then we will take a close look at the most significant real-world experiments in socialism, the centrally planned Soviet model, the hybrid market socialism of China, and the self-management system of Yugoslavia. By the end of this module, you should have a deep understanding not only of what these systems looked like on paper, but how they actually worked in practice, their successes, their struggles, and the context in which they emerged. Let's begin by laying the groundwork. 1. The origins of comparative economic systems as a field. Comparative economic systems is a branch of economics that asks, how do different ways of organizing production, distribution, and consumption actually work? And how do we compare them? In the early to mid-20th century, this was not a purely academic question. Two dominant systems, capitalism and socialism, were locked in both ideological and geopolitical rivalry. The way countries organized their economies was not just an internal choice, it shaped their foreign policy, their alliances, and in many cases, their survival. The goal of this field is to do more than just describe systems. We want to understand their guiding principles, the institutions that embody those principles, and their real-world performance in terms of growth, equity, innovation, and human welfare. 2. Early debates about socialism. Let's go back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Industrial capitalism had transformed societies. Factories, railroads, mechanized agriculture, and global trade networks were reshaping economies at a pace never seen before. But with this transformation came deep inequality, worker exploitation, cycles of boom and bust, and social unrest. Socialism emerged as a response to these problems. The earliest debates were about whether society should continue to rely on private ownership and market forces, or whether the means of production should be owned collectively, by the state, by cooperatives, or by the workers themselves. Key points in these early debates included: ownership: should factories, land, and resources be privately owned or publicly owned? Planning versus markets: should resource allocation be left to supply and demand, or coordinated through central planning? Distribution of wealth: should income be based purely on market value of labor, or should it reflect social needs and equality goals? Innovation and efficiency: could a socialist economy innovate and maintain efficiency without the profit motive? Thinkers like Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and later socialist economists argued that capitalism's contradictions would eventually lead to its collapse, and that socialism would be both fairer and more rational. Meanwhile, defenders of capitalism argued that markets were the most efficient way to allocate resources, that private ownership encouraged innovation, and that attempts to replace markets with planning would lead to stagnation and inefficiency. 3. The theoretical foundations of socialism. The theory of socialism can be summarized around a few core principles. Social ownership of the means of production, not necessarily everything, but key strategic sectors like heavy industry, energy, transport, and natural resources. Planned allocation: resources and labor are directed according to a central plan designed to meet social and economic goals. Production for use, not profit: goods and services are produced primarily to meet human needs, not to maximize private profit. Egalitarian distribution: reducing income inequality through wage policies, public services, and redistribution. However, even within socialism, there were variations. Some models were highly centralized and authoritarian, others allowed more decentralization and worker participation. The key debate inside socialism was always the same: how much coordination should happen through planning, and how much through market mechanisms. 4. The Soviet economic system. No discussion of socialism in practice can begin without the Soviet Union, which from 1922 to 1991 operated the world's largest centrally planned economy. Structure of the Soviet model. Central planning through Gosplan. The State Planning Committee, known as Gosplan, created multi-year plans, most famously the 5-year plans, that set production targets for every major sector. State ownership: virtually all large-scale industry, transportation, energy, and foreign trade were owned by the state. Collectivized agriculture: Small farms were merged into large collective or state farms, intended to be more efficient and easier to control. Administrative command system, managers in factories and farms were given specific output targets and resource allocations. Prices were set administratively, not by markets. Strengths. Rapid industrialization, especially in the 1930s and post-World War II period. Ability to mobilize resources for large national goals, e.g., building heavy industry, winning the space race. Near full employment and basic social services for all citizens, including housing, education, and healthcare. Weaknesses. Chronic shortages of consumer goods. Little incentive for efficiency or innovation, because success was measured by fulfilling quotas rather than meeting consumer needs. Bureaucratic complexity and rigidity, leading to waste and misallocation. Despite its problems, the Soviet system remained viable for decades, and for much of the 20th century was seen by many developing countries as an alternative to capitalist development. 5. Market socialism in China. China's economic system is unique in that it started with a Soviet-style command economy after 1949, but beginning in 1978 under Deng Xiaoping, it gradually introduced market mechanisms while retaining socialist political structures. Key features of Chinese market socialism. Dual-track system. In the early reforms, state enterprises continued to fulfill planned quotas, but were also allowed to sell surplus output on the market. Special economic zones, SEZs, certain regions were open to foreign investment and market-oriented policies to encourage export-oriented growth. Decentralization. Local governments were given more autonomy to pursue development, leading to regional competition and innovation. State-owned enterprises, SOEs, in key sectors. While much of the economy now operates under market rules, sectors like energy, telecommunications, and transport remain under state control. This hybrid model has delivered rapid growth and lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, but it has also created new inequalities and environmental challenges. 6. Self-management in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, after breaking with the Soviet Union in 1948, developed a system of worker self-management that was neither capitalist nor Soviet-style socialist. Principles of the Yugoslav model. Enterprises were socially owned, not by the state, but by the workers themselves collectively. Workers elected management boards and participated in major decision-making. Prices were influenced by markets, but enterprises also cooperated through planning agreements. Decentralization was extensive, with local government and enterprises exercising significant autonomy. Advantages. Higher levels of workplace democracy and motivation. Greater flexibility compared to rigid central planning. Challenges. Coordination problems between enterprises. Inflation and unemployment in later years, partly due to macroeconomic instability. Political fragmentation that eventually mirrored the country's ethnic and regional divisions. In Module 1, we have traced the path from socialist theory to its most prominent real-world applications, the centralized Soviet model, the hybrid Chinese approach, and Yugoslavia's worker-managed economy. We have seen that each had unique strengths and weaknesses, shaped by history, politics, and geography. In Module 2, we will turn to the reasons for the decline and collapse of the Soviet system, the competing interpretations of that collapse, and the ongoing debates about what socialism could look like in the 21st century. We will ask, is there still a viable alternative to capitalism today, and if so, what form might it take?